Well, good morning. Yeah. Happy day. Okay. Good morning, and welcome to the 7th in our 10-part Summer Forum Speaker Series here at the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. Okay. We're going to have, today our presenter is Pat Bagley, not Pat Shea, who will be speaking on August 20th. Pat Bagley has been for nearly 40 years the editorial cartoonist for the Salt Lake Tribune, where he has produced over, during that time, over 10,000 cartoons, and is syndicated worldwide in over 800 publications. Quite an accomplishment. Okay? He's also won many awards and honors, including in 2009, the Herb Block Cartoonist Award. And I had the honor years ago of meeting Herb Block when he was still the cartoonist for the Washington Post. And that year in 2009, he was unanimously selected as the best editorial cartoonist in the country by Herb Block Foundation, as well as Gary Trudeau. Okay? And tremendous honor that he can be speaking to us this morning on the subject of why we are laughing. Why are we laughing? You know, political cartooning and current events. Okay? About halfway through, when Pat finishes his presentation, we'll go to the offering, and then we will go to your questions and answers. Okay? And when we conclude, just before we conclude, that my wife Kathy will make an announcement about the presentation for next week. Okay? So with that in mind, let's welcome our speaker today, Pat Bagley.
First of all, I'll talk about the jacket. Seems to draw a lot of interest. And I say draw a lot of interest. I also draw a crowd. I bought this jacket about a year ago, and somebody that I was close to didn't like it, so it sat in the closet unused. And then I looked at it and I thought, this is a canvas, you know. It's a blank piece of paper, so I took it out and I started to draw on it. And I use this special fabric paint that comes in tubes, and it's kind of tricky to write with, but it just kind of grew, and it's a work in progress. But everything on this has some meaning for me. So probably this evening I'll do something about the Unitarians in a blank spot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some slides, talk a little bit about cartooning, and then afterwards I thought we'd spend most of the time answering your questions. You must unlearn what you have learned. And I think in these days of our nutty politics, you have to not assume that you know what's going on. Okay, when I started cartooning, this is not my cartoon, this is by Cleban. I thought it was going to be like this. Out of the way, you swine, a cartoonist is coming. When I started cartooning, there were about 300 newspapers in the country that had a full-time staff cartoonist. And now we're down to about 35 in the nation. You know, it's just been a complete massacre. Recently, Nick Anderson of the Houston Chronicle was fired. The guy won a Pulitzer. You know, they let him go. And that means that the state of Texas does not have a political cartoonist. And to put that in context, France and Texas are about the same size and about the same population. France has got 150, 200 cartoonists. Texas has none. I went to a cartoon festival a few years ago, and I met these people, and I was introduced to them, as they were part of this failing humor magazine called Charlie Hebdo. And so, I met these people, and very inoffensive people, nice guys, and I looked at Charlie Hebdo, and I thought, this is kind of juvenile, because the French do a lot of nudity and a lot of sex jokes, but it's part of their culture, so it's something that I didn't quite appreciate. Then the next year, they were assassinated by terrorists. So, the first cartoon showing the glamour of the cartooning world, it just got deadly serious. And, nobody saw this coming. I didn't see it coming. But this is a memorial to those cartoonists who were killed. This is how I start with my ideas, is I do a quick sketch. And so, obviously, who's the guy on top? You can, you can tell by the hair. Here's another quick sketch. This election is rigged. By the way, I did this cartoon over a year ago. So we knew about the Russian involvement way back then. This isn't anything new. This is an old cartoon. It's a 130-year-old cartoon depicting Utah. And back then, in the rest of the country, Utah was viewed as kind of a place that was run by cultists. And they sent up missionaries to round up young girls and bring them back to Utah. Okay, well, actually, we know it's more like this. Welcome to Utah, a wholly owned and operated subsidiary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Quick story. The liquor laws here have always been contentious. And the legislature thought, well, let's see if we can revamp the liquor laws. So they appointed a commission to come up with recommendations. And this is probably 25, 30 years ago. So the commission went out and did their work, and they came up with certain fixes to, our screwy liquor laws. And they brought their work back to the Senate, and they said, well, here's the law. But they needed one senator to put his name to it, to introduce the legislation, and they could not find one senator who would do it. Well, the commission thought we've done a lot of work. Why let this go to waste? So they talked to the people in the church office building who looked it over and said, well, this looks good to us, no problem. By the time they got back up to the legislature, every single senator wanted to endorse that piece of legislation. Profiles and courage. But then you have this going on. You Mormons are so bizarre. Only in Utah. Bridal gun show. So I was in Korea last week, and I brought a slideshow to show to these people, and I was bringing slides to show to them, cartoons to show to them, to say, you're not going to understand this. This is culturally just outside. And I showed them the slide, and they just completely did not get it. Comic-Con, blew up here, and this I did for fun. So you've got the Salt Lake Comic-Con claiming that the San Diego Comic-Con are imposters. Careful, Robin, these people are imposters. Well, obviously, it's all just for fun. It's all phony. Again, this is almost a year old. This is Donald Trump, Jabba the Trump, when he captured the Republican Party. And it's remarkable how the Republicans fell into line after he became the nominee. And every single one of the people who was running against him said really awful things, true things, but really awful things about Trump. And all of a sudden, when he becomes the nominee, they fall into line, and that's all forgotten. I went to Romney's speech here at the university when he went on national TV, national media, and just flayed Trump, and it was brutal, and it was honest, and it was true. And again, it's remarkable how after having said that, Romney was willing to go humble himself before Trump, looking for a job with the administration as Secretary of State. But if you know one thing about this guy, he will humiliate you. He just thrives on just being a jerk. Speaking of which, here we have Trump saying more police, more walls, more guards, more detention prisons, more torture. I call it the Trump freedom agenda. Okay. This is, again, from almost a year ago. Nothing's changed in this past year. He's, just done awful things to the office of the presidency. And the thing is, it's not like he's done damage. He's done tremendous damage. And this is, again, why I start with this unlearn what you think you know. We're not going to get back to regular order again. You have to start thinking ahead to changes are going to be made, and it's not going to be the same, but you have to take action, and you might have to put your bodies on the line to make that change come into effect. Days since last Trump cartoon. So my publisher wishes I would do fewer Trump cartoons. But I say, well, if you go to the New York Times, the top 10 stories on the politics page are Trump. Top 10 stories in the editorial page are Trump. Top 10 stories in the style section are Trump. So it's been Trump, Trump, Trump all the time. And I really do wish that I could do more of other things, and I'm consciously trying to do that because this guy can just be consuming. Okay, forcefully telling a child not to touch something always works. So in Korea, when I showed them this, I wasn't quite sure how they were going to take it. I wasn't quite clear on how they view Kim Jong-un, this guy in the north who's kind of crazy. But I showed them this, and they went nuts. They thought this was great. They loved it. I mean, they know he's crazy too. And I actually got to meet the press secretary of the president of Korea. And I was able to sit down with him for 40 minutes and ask questions. And what came from that encounter was, Kim Jong-un is a known quantity. They've learned to live with this guy. They're more worried about what Trump could possibly do. This is an old cartoon. President Hollande of France is showing Obama, and he says, this is the anti-ISIS coalition. Okay, and you can identify every single one of those players. And I did this because, we have this idea that you can go in and just get the bad guys, just shoot the bad guys. Talking like 5-year-olds. It started with George Bush. Just get the bad guys. And I had a conversation with a conservative cartoonist who said that to me. He said, well, just go into the Middle East and clean it up and get the bad guys. And that sparked this cartoon, taking a very, very complex issue and showing it visually. And I think I did a pretty good job on that. We just narrowly dodged a bullet with the Republican plan to get rid of health care. Again, this is just a quick illustration to show what it looks like. I think the Republican agenda is fairly simple. It is to give the rich and powerful even more wealth and power. If you look at what they've done since they've had the Congress and the presidency, it's been all about that. The first act of this Congress, the very first thing that they tried to do, was to dismantle the Office of Ethics. If you understand that, you understand everything that's happened since. This is actually a cartoon I did after September 11th, after 9/11. And it's a very simple, stark cartoon, just the date. And I was trying to think, what do I do? How do I draw this? And it was just too horrific to wrap my head around. And cartoonists like to go to, images of the Statue of Liberty crying and stuff like that. And people like that. They eat it up. But I thought, no, this is, I just can't go there. So it came out the next day, and this is a very stark image, very few words. But then, in contrast, this is a cartoon I did to celebrate the 100th anniversary of national parks, which is very visual and very colorful. And you've got Teddy Roosevelt talking to a hiker, and the hiker says, "Mr. Roosevelt, what have we got?" And he says, "America's best idea if you can keep it." Okay, and I'm kind of playing off of that story of Benjamin Franklin coming out after they created the Constitution, and some woman asked him, "Mr. Franklin, what do we have?" And he says, "A republic if we can keep it." But yeah, I showed this to the Koreans, and they said, and then you can see the flag in there. And they go, "Whoa." This is that heartbreaking image of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian kid who was a refugee, and the family was trying to cross the Mediterranean. The boat sank, and he washed up on a beach in Turkey. And I think the reason this is, it's just awful, so awful. But he looked like he was just asleep, and you who've had children, they're playing and they just are dead to the world. And that was all of our children. Alan Kurdi, this struck all of us because we all connect with this child. And using that image, you don't do casually. And I thought, I'm not going to do this unless it's a good cartoon. It's got to be a good one. And so that's why I drew the world with its head in the sand. And I think it came out fairly well. But it's a grim cartoon, and I don't like doing these. This is a cartoon that probably is my most successful cartoon ever. This is Malala. She's the girl that the Taliban tried to assassinate, and she recovered. And the reason they wanted to kill her was because she was a proponent of women's education. Even when she was 14 years old, she was a big voice for women's education in Pakistan and around the world. She survived. She was awarded the Nobel Prize. But I did this cartoon when it was clear that she was going to live from her injuries. It says, "What terrifies religious extremists like the Taliban are not American tanks or bombs or bullets. It's a girl with a book." Okay, when I did this, I thought, well, that's an okay cartoon. And I sent it out there, and then as they say, it went viral. It went all over the world. And I started getting this cartoon back, sent to me back with the caption was translated into Italian, into Russian, into Arabic. It went all over the world. Okay, so that's the end of the slideshow. But I've got time for questions, right?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for being here with us. Can you talk a little bit more about the artistic process and how it might have, I know I'm moving away from politics, but how it might have evolved with changes in technology?
Okay. I grew up in a house where my dad would sit in front of the television and he would doodle. He would do caricatures of the people on TV. So I assumed everybody's dad did that, right? But it was fortunate for me because it demystified the process. Sometimes when I draw, it looks like it's magic to people. But I've been doing this for a long time, and and explain the process. It's hard to explain the process. I can say this about the cartoons: is when I wake up in the morning, I listen to the radio. I catch up on my reading. I read the Washington Post, New York Times, but I also read Breitbart and the right-wing media to see what they're saying. And then I come up with, well, this is the thing that outrages me the most. And that's going to be, that'll be today's cartoon. And it's always a high wire act. You know, when I go into work, sometimes I get the idea really quickly. Sometimes even before I get to work, I get the idea. But then other times I'm just pushing the deadline, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I barely get in under the wire. And if I don't make it, we can always use a syndicated cartoon to put in my spot. But that happens very rarely, maybe 4 or 5 times over the past 40 years. And you can always do a bad cartoon, but the idea is to do a good one.
Great. Question here.
I don't dare delve into the dark regions of your mind. I just accept your creative process as a miracle we should all accept. But I wonder if you take ideas from the public, and I have a second question too, like if you talk to Tim about Andrew Jackson, I think he could give you a whole raft of parallels with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But I'm actually wondering about your creative, what tools you use. I'm interested in, I love the artwork, and do you have a favorite pen or paper? Do you use fountain pens at all, or what are your different tools?
I spent years early on when I started trying to find the right tool. I tried brushes, I tried crow quill, I tried lots of different things. And the paper I got this very expensive paper that you could put this acid wash on it, and the cross-hatching would appear, and it was $15 a sheet, and that was expensive way back then even. And so I tried all these different things, and I found that the thing that I liked the best was this cheap felt tip pen and typewriter paper. And so I used that for quite a while, and then about 6-7 years ago, they stopped making that pen. So I stocked up, and they lasted for about a year, and then I went back to pencil. And I thought, well, but then when I started using pencil, I really, really liked it. I thought, why didn't I do this forever? And just lately, I have converted over to iPad Pro, and it's a program called Procreate. And so what you're seeing lately, not that one, but the ones that are coming out lately are all created digitally, on a screen. And it seems like kind of selling out, but it's really good. I mean, the feel of the thing, and it's incredibly like the real thing. So is that?
Yeah, I believe most of us have encountered Thomas Nast in our social studies classes in high school, but wondering if you could give the elevator version of cartoon history in the world and the United States. And in that culture, in that 35 remaining cartoonists, do you guys have a union or a club? And
okay.
You have proteges or people who you've influenced?
So the idea of cartooning is just graffiti. And there are Roman walls where the Roman Emperor Claudius is being depicted in caricature, and apparently his nose ran a lot, so he's got a drippy nose and these. And that's political commentary. That was a political cartoon, and that's 2,000 years ago. And you have the builders of the pyramids. When they weren't building the pyramids, you can see that there are scratchings. They're making fun of the pharaoh. So it's a natural instinct. They say that the first American cartoon was Ben Franklin. We just talked about Ben Franklin. And it was that cartoon of the snake that's chopped up into pieces that says join or die. Okay, that may be the first American political cartoon. And it's right there. You can see it later.
So with all of the craziness going on in the world and the sort of deluge of news about it, how do you choose what your cartoon is going to be? How do you allow it to speak to and through you?
So Trump sucks up all the oxygen in the room, and he's usually the natural way to go. But I try to do a number of local cartoons, because when all is said and done, it's the local cartoons that have the most impact. My cartoon about Trump, it's kind of like a minnow attacking, Trump. There are hundreds of us. But if I do a cartoon about some local issue, it's like a great white attack. They know it. If I do a cartoon about Governor Herbert, he's going to feel that. He's going to hear about that all day long.
It's my take that the vast majority of editorial cartoonists are of a somewhat liberal bent. I know there was kind of a takeoff on Doonesbury for a while, but it was rather tepid and talentless, I thought. I was wondering, as I assume a Mormon born in Utah, raised in California, then going to BYU and I think, a mission in La Paz, Bolivia, can you trace just basically the evolution of your political view?
I want you to write my biography.
Okay.
So the other thing I picked up from my father was he was a big reader, and so we always had newspapers, we always had books around, and he was a Republican. But that was back when you could be a progressive Republican. There was Hatfield, there was Rockefeller, there was Percy, a whole raft of progressive Republicans. George Romney is another one. But then over the years, the Republican Party has become more doctrinaire. And it's ended up now where the John Birch Society used to be. It's an incredibly right-wing organization. And my evolution along the path, along this way was, I was fairly, not apolitical, but, I wasn't a big fan of the Clintons, and, I did the cartoons, and then I got George Bush. And George Bush radicalized me. And it's in his administration that you see the fullest expression of today's Republican ideology. And it was a disaster. Biggest foreign policy disaster maybe ever that we ever committed. And then he ends it up by, the biggest economic failure since the Great Depression. And how Republicans recovered from that, I don't know. Fox News, I guess. There was one cartoon that I did that between the time that I did it and when it came out the next day, something happened which changed the meaning of the cartoon. And it was something completely random. Well, for example, Robert Kirby, he wrote a column that came out on September 11th. He wrote it on September 10th, right? And he talked about, learning how to fly an airplane, and he'd be really bad at it, and he'd probably end up flying into a building. So how do you control for that? You can't control for that. I guess my biggest regret is that there are things that I wish I had done. I wish I had done things better. I wish that I had spent more time honing my craft, and I could have, just done more, I guess. So there's that regret. But as far as cartoons I've done, I'll stand by them. Stick with them.
Question here.
Good morning. I've lived in Utah for just less than 4 weeks now. I'm what may have been called an East Coast liberal, and have not really engaged with my neighbors in terms of politics. But can you give me a sense of how the people in Utah feel from a moral and ethical perspective when they see Trump?
I have a hard time. I can't speak for them. I really can't. But when I was at BYU, I was very right wing. I went through a libertarian phase, and I read all their books. And Mormons don't like Trump as much as the evangelicals do. The evangelicals I find completely inexplicable. How they can stand by this guy, I just don't get it all. Mormons are a little more conflicted about it. but they still, again, the LDS Church is very hierarchical, and you do what your leaders tell you to do. And since he's in the office of the president, they give that a lot of respect. And so I guess I guess that's why they are still behind Trump. But like I say, I think they're more conflicted than other parts of his constituency.
Will you please comment on the future of the Salt Lake Tribune?
The future is bright. I get to, finally, we're going to have a brand new website going up on Tuesday. And everybody complains about the website, and I admit it's crappy. It's been a really bad website. But we've been holding it together with baling wire and chewing gum. We just haven't had the resources. And then we got bought last year by the Huntsmans, and Paul Huntsman has been putting money into the website, money into hiring people. So the website's going to come out. It's the same website that the Washington Post uses. So, it's going to be top notch. There are a few bugs to be worked out, I'm sure, as we transition over to it. But the Washington Post is a good example of what can happen. The Post was losing money. It was bought by Bezos, and Bezos has done some things, and they're in the black. They're making money. So, the Tribune, we're going to find our way to profitability.
I spent 20 years living in Washington and enjoying the Post and luxuriating in the wisdom and wit of her block. You're every bit as equal with a tougher audience.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, her block was the cartoonist at the Washington Post for, 40, 50 years, a long time. And that was back in the day when cartoonists were rock stars, and being syndicated meant that you made lots of money. There were several papers in the Washington, D.C. area that were in a newspaper war. And they needed money. The Washington Post needed money, and so they went to her block, to see if he would loan them some. And they gave him stock in exchange, right? And by the time he died, he was worth $70 million. Like I say, that was back in the day.
Can you point to a cartoon that had concrete policy implications and changes?
One of my cartoons?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
When I do a cartoon, it can achieve one of three things, or all three things, or two of three things. I want to educate people about the issue. I want to entertain, folks, and I want to persuade people. So when the legislature's in session, they come up with all kinds of funny stuff, and I try to hit back. One of the things that I constantly return to are the public lands issues in the state of Utah. Because once they're gone, they're gone. And I think this whole thing about trying to take our lands back, even though we never really owned them, is just a way for them to sell them off, make money off of it. So that's one thing that I care about deeply, and you can see it in the cartoons, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a year. I'll do one of those.
In your opinion, why are we down to 37 cartoonists throughout the United States?
Well, we are down to just a handful of full-time cartoonists who work for daily papers. But there are a number of cartoonists who are younger, and they're making their art felt on the internet. You see, you don't need a publisher to take care of you if you've got the internet and you can post it yourself. So we really have about 150 cartoonists in the United States that are doing political cartoons. But they've had to find out a different means of doing it, of getting their stuff across. we have an organization, the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, and I'm the president of that organization this year. And one of the things I've been tasked with is to find a way to make sure that I'm not the last president.
Question here. I'm just wondering, do you know any right-wing cartoonists that you admire, if there is such a thing as a right-wing cartoonist? And what would their favorite subject be?
There are some right-wing cartoonists that I admire their art. There's one that I can think of where I think, well, you know, he's not as crazy as most of them, and he occasionally comes across with a good point. But there are a lot of them, you know, and I think there are some that are really incredibly bad. There's a guy named Garrison. You should look him up and you will laugh for all the wrong reasons, you know. He's got Donald Trump wearing armor, flying an eagle, you know, trying to reach the sun, which says, "Make America Great Again." It's just awful stuff, but really entertaining.
Why are there so few women cartoonists?
Now that is a good question. And I counted, and for every one female cartoonist among my peers, there are 20 guys. And I thought, that's pretty screwy. But then I did the same thing with comic strip cartoons, and I got the same ratio. And I can't explain it. I don't know why. When I was in Korea, I spoke at the Animation High School, which covers more than just animation. It covers cartooning and illustration and all of that. Most of the people there were women, girls. And so I asked them about that. Why are they, you know? And the answer was, well, they're emotionally a little better at things. They can tell stories, you know, stories that resonate. You know, guys just want to blow stuff up, right? So I thought that was interesting.
We're going to go here because I don't see anyone looking at me right now on that side. I'll come over to you.
One of the things that struck me in days of yore is how Jimmy Carter was drawn smaller and smaller and smaller as his administration faced greater and greater challenges. Now we've got Trump, who's, you know, famously corpulent. So when he's drawn as a caricature, he's drawn as Jabba the Hutt. But do you see a time when the Trump figure will become smaller and smaller and smaller?
Actually, there are some cartoonists who are starting to do that. You know, show them as smaller. You know, but that was something that I think McNally, a great cartoonist from the 70s and 80s, you know, he did that. You know, I can't see, at least for me, I can't see drawing Trump any smaller because he's just big and gross and.
I just say he's 6'2" and 75 pounds heavier than I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Melanie Hopkinson, and I wanted to first thank you for, as long as we're talking politics, for helping my brother's obituary go viral by posting it on your Twitter account.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, do you ever take suggestions or want suggestions from your reading public, or do you like to?
The quick answer is no.
Okay.
But I get suggestions all the time. And, you know, I never do somebody else's cartoon. But, you know, some of these suggestions will prompt me to think, oh, you know, I should be doing something about that issue, or it makes me kind of look at it again. And you know, so it's not like it's wasted energy. But if I do a cartoon, I want it to be my idea. I want it to be my creation.
Question here.
You talked about the influence that your father has had on you. What influence have you had on your kids?
Not much. I mean, they grew up in a household where they saw their father reading a lot, reading the newspapers and listening to the news, and they have absolutely no interest in politics. Except that my oldest son, he moved into my basement a couple years ago with his girlfriend, and they got married last year. And she told me that she was a DACA kid, that she had been brought into the United States, and it was complete news to me, because she was more American than my son. But she was brought here illegally and was not a citizen. And all of a sudden, my son has become very interested in politics, because it becomes very personal to him. And last week, she got a residency, so that she, is a little more firmly entrenched here. And one of the things I found out is that even though she was married to an American, even though she'd been here, 20, 25 years, she could still have been kicked out.
Yes, when you draw every other week the cartoon without a caption, do you have in mind what you want to have the correct caption be?
So I have this feature called In Your Own Words, and I draw the cartoon and you come up with the caption. And that's a great question. And actually I don't. When I do the cartoon, I have no idea what the caption is going to be. Yeah, And it's always fun to see what people come up with, and usually it's really great stuff. But if you do send your suggestion in, put your name and your address on it, otherwise I can't use it. And I've had some great things that I couldn't use because they didn't do the address thing.
Question here.
Over the years, you have skewered our legislature, much to all of our delight. Tell me, do you have a relationship with them? Do they ever call you or meet you on the street or harass you? I mean, do they like you? What kind of relationship do you have actually with those men and women up there?
They don't like me. I mean, and I've noticed on Twitter, I follow a lot of these people. I follow a lot of our legislators, and because I want to be informed. And just this last week, I looked and I noticed that none of them follow me back. So they just want to live in their own little bubble, They just don't want to hear about it.
Question here.
Do you have any artistic inspiration? Are there any cartoonist or fine artists that you look at?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think I'm seeing a little Picasso. His dove from the Mexican Olympics, I believe.
Well, no. Great minds think alike, I guess. I don't know. There were cartoonists that inspired me, that I thought this stuff was great. There's Pat Oliphant, who's just a complete master. I hosted a cartoon convention here 3-4 years ago, and we were able to get Pat Oliphant to come up and talk to us. And it was remarkable. We have a room full of cartoonists, the most irreverent people in America. But when Pat Oliphant was talking to them, it was like church. You could hear a pin drop. So Pat Oliphant is probably my greatest influence, but there are other people I like as well.
Hand is right here. Question?
Yes, I want to find out, I noticed that not every day there is a cartoon of yours in the paper, and whether you have a contract for so many cartoons a year?
No.
Or do other cartoons show up, by other cartoonists?
Well, for instance, when I was in Korea, I didn't do cartoons, and they just pulled cartoons off of the syndicate site. I put those in my place. And we don't have anything very formal about you have to do so many cartoons, and but I do 5 a week, and I rarely miss a day. So we haven't had to really formalize that whole aspect of things.
I'm looking for the next question. Now I'm going to ask, and there's a question. Okay.
I think we all know that you've got a special gift. You're not just one of the ordinary cartoonists who is doing this just because your dad doodled. So I wonder if there was an experience or an event that happened so that you suddenly realized that you really were magic?
I wish my mother were alive to hear this. I don't know. I do know this. Every morning I get up and I am just happy that I get to do what I love. You know, I really enjoy what I do. And I know how lucky I am. You know, I'm incredibly blessed, I guess.
Good morning, and thank you for your great work. I've lived on and off in Salt Lake since 2000, recently returned after almost a year outside. I know there's a lot of buildings going up, apartment housing, et cetera. The populations, various studies say that the population is going to increase. Do you think there's ever any hope that we'll become purple at least? Or blue?
Well, you know, in elections, Democrats come up with maybe 35% of the votes here. But they've gerrymandered things so that we have no national representation. There is a new proposal. What's it called? Better boundaries, that they're looking at how they apportion the districts and how they carve them up so that it will be more equitable. You know, and if they actually do that, then the Democrats will have somebody in Congress, to represent us. You know, even if they don't do that, I think there's a chance that these guys are vulnerable. You know, I think Mia Love is vulnerable. I think the 3rd district, Chaffetz leaving is going to be interesting. So.
You've been in this career for a long time, and we're hoping you're not going to retire like many of the rest of us have. What are your plans for continued employment? We hope you have those.
Well, I think I'll be doing this until I'm not any good anymore. You know, and if I start missing a step, then I'll think maybe about retiring. But I've got no plans to do that for the near future or long term. So we'll see.
Yeah, this is sort of a follow-up to the previous question, which is, you know, we value so much what you do. And again, we're all thanking you. But do you interact with university students, or how is what you do to carry on by working with younger people to learn how to do this?
So I get people reaching out to me, you know, showing me their work and asking for advice, and so I talk to quite a number of people who are interested in cartooning, and you know, I'm encouraging them, and occasionally you come across one who's really gifted, you know, who will carry on the tradition. So and they're out there, you know. I could recommend quite a number of good young cartoonists that you guys should follow. Jen Sorensen is one that comes to mind. Her stuff is, she did the best healthcare cartoon ever. And it was a plea to the Supreme Court. This is a couple years ago. But Jen Sorensen is somebody that you should look up.
Question here. Hi, thank you so much for your wonderful work. We all really appreciate it. As I watch the news, and it seems like you obviously are a student of the news, it seems like our politics is being driven a lot by people, the voters, and that the politicians are following the voters. Where do the people get their ideas? Is it the right-wing media that's driving this drive to the right? And what's the counter to that?
Yes. So I interact with people. They put comments on my cartoons, or they'll call, and they'll say the craziest stuff, and I'll think, where did you get that? And the answer is they get it from right-wing media. You know, they get it from Fox News. You know, this whole thing about Obama being a Kenyan, you know, being a Muslim, you know, obviously false. But if you watch Fox News, there was always some question. You know, if you listen to the right-wing media, that's where they get their stuff. And it's like a cult. You know, these people are brainwashed. You know, you try to argue with them and they come up with the craziest stuff, but in their world, they believe that stuff. You know, they believe Breitbart is fact-based, which is just nuts. You know, one of the things that Trump has tried to do is he's tried to undermine the press. So he's gone after the New York Times and Washington Post, and you know, what happens then is if you can undermine trust in those outlets, then you have to get your information from Trump. You know, he becomes the arbiter of truth.
Pat, a couple of times you've kind of touched on religious kind of extremists.
Yeah.
And yet we talk about the ISIS and being Muslim. Have you ever put those together and talked about the ISIS in Christianity and the fundamentalist and the extremist in Christianity? I feel that's underrepresented, actually.
Sometimes I call the legislature the Velvet Taliban. And I have done cartoons where I do make the comparison. There were the Bundys, you know, who did the occupation, you know, and they're religious extremists. You know, they're just as bad as the Taliban. They're just as bad as, well, I don't know quite if they're just as bad as ISIS, because ISIS is pretty murderous, but it's pretty extreme, you know, and it can lead to really bad stuff.
It seems that the American dream, the shining city on the hill, has become kind of a cartoon. And do you think we on the inside can really appreciate that? Can we see ourselves as others see us? Do we need foreign cartoons to really pin it down?
Let's see if I understand what you're saying, is that we have a misperception about what we're all about. That we're the exceptional nation, that nothing ever bad will happen to us like other nations. This whole idea of exceptionalism, that we're somehow chosen by God to be a different kind of nation, is kind of dangerous, you know, because we are just another nation. And, you know, unless we're careful, we're going to lose a lot of the stuff that we have taken for granted. I think that was answer to your question. Okay.
Excuse me. My question's about censorship. Are there any topics that your editors will not publish or let you, or are there any topics that you yourself will not cover and will refuse to discuss?
Oh. Well, the publisher, it's his paper, and he can say that they won't publish a cartoon or not, right? But he hasn't done that. You know, in fact, the Huntsmans have been pretty good about letting me do what I want to do. You know, yeah, there are things that I won't touch. You know, I'm not going to make fun of Mormons. Well, no. If you look at the Mormon religion, there are some people in the religion who think that green jello is sacred, right? And if I make fun of green jello, then obviously I'm a bad guy. Recently I ran across these people who thought because I drew the angel Moroni, you know, that was sacrilegious. So I'm fine doing that, you know. But there are certain things that, you know, like, I'm not going to do cartoons about Mormon underwear. You know, what's the point? You know, I could make fun of it, I could ridicule it, but what's the point? So there are things that I stay away from, but I do deal with Mormon issues if I think it's cultural.
Two quick questions. One is about the creative process, and when does the caption come in? Do you do it before or after the?
Well, like I say, it's a high wire act, and it's always different. You know, sometimes I get the caption first, and other times I just start drawing, and I kind of know what's going on, but I don't have the caption until the very last. So it's not like one comes before the other. It's always, you know, maybe the caption first, or maybe the words, or maybe the picture, and it's always different.
And the other thing is, I would definitely buy a Pat Bagley jacket like that.
Question here.
I have a question about the alleged gassing of Syrians by Assad, and Cy Hirsch had to publish in Germany about that. And why has that story been repressed?
I don't know. I mean, Cy Hirsch has done some great stuff. I think he won the Pulitzer for the things he did during Vietnam. Yeah, and he did some things during the Bush administration that were pretty good. But then he's also, recently, there was something he did that was kind of, questionable. So I like Cy Hirsch a lot. And I don't know enough about this issue to really give you a good answer.
Perhaps I'll pose the last question. You did a cartoon recently in which the president was either by remote control or ventriloquist had his son standing next to him, and the whole panel was full of the word lie.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could speak to that, and with regard to what's called fake news and the distortion of facts, and what the obligation of a cartoonist in one frame or just a few frames to be able to share truth.
So we live in this age where we all carry a device, and in a couple of keystrokes you can come up with the facts, the truth of almost anything. But do we use it for that? Well, a lot of us use it to reinforce our biases, right? And in this age where you can get to the quick of things, where you can get to the truth of it so easily, it's been perverted. And people have put out stuff that's just baloney. And the reason that they do it is because it makes money, and it's exciting. People get excited by this stuff. The Muslims are going to come and they're going to take over your town and they're going to impose Sharia law. That's just nuts. In Iowa during the election, the Iowa Republicans, the two biggest issues in their world were illegal immigration and terrorism. Iowa. Right? They got bigger issues, I think. For example, maybe the big ag, robbing the farmers, and that's more immediate, but they don't see that. Places like Fox News, Breitbart, they sensationalize things, and it's exciting. Geez, does Hillary really have a child sex ring in the basement of this pizza parlor?
Anything you wish to say in conclusion?
No, but I want to thank you all for coming out today, and you've been a great audience, and I hope to do more cartoons for you.
Okay, let's... Two quick announcements, okay? One is that Pat's going to join us next door in Elliott Hall, where you'll have an opportunity to talk to him one-on-one and purchase some cartoon prints if you want. And also then Kathy has an announcement about our summer forum speakers next Sunday.
Okay, yes, I want to make an announcement that next Sunday we are having two speakers, Elliot Francis and William McMahon, and they are going to be talking about autism for adults and how there's a support group, how supports are being developed. Elliot describes himself as an autist. Dr. McMahon is a psychiatrist who has worked with families for 30 years, and they have created a new nonprofit organization in Salt Lake called Optimizing Autism, and they will talk about that. I've heard both of them speak, and it's going to be a really good session, so I hope you'll come.
And then also then that's August 6th, on August 13th, we're going to have Representative Patrice Arendt and Representative Dan McKay here to talk about the mysteries of the Utah State Legislature. Okay. And then on August 20th, Pat Shea will be here to speak about religious liberty and the First Amendment. So we hope that we'll see you in August, because August is on the horizon. So let's again express our appreciation to Pat Bagley.